Have you ever wanted to go to space? Venturing into the unknown, exploring worlds that exist in ways you could never imagine, finding lost relics belonging to civilizations long past, and exploring the nature of entirely new ecosystems. Maybe, just maybe, you'll meet people like you, and you might eventually make a home for yourself in the stars. This near-infinite expanse of mystery is ripe for discoveries and tales that range from the mundane to the wondrous. While we have yet to truly experience the limits of this wonder in reality, media has gone wild with speculation. Movies tell the grand tales of those venturing into this world, or use galaxy-spanning civilizations as a backdrop for an epic tale of adventure. Video games, however, put you right in the shoes of those exploring this vast unknown. A specific tailored experience lets you live within a meticulously crafted alien world, while a vast galaxy offers the opportunity to discover that which no other person has ever seen. And while every game tackles this experience in their own way, there is one that takes a more ambitious approach. One that doesn't just promise us a bounty of new worlds to explore, lost civilizations to discover, and alien wildlife to document, but adventures to undertake and questions to answer. To truly understand how it works and where it falters, we must head into the Starfield. If you've played a Bethesda game, you'll understand how Starfield works. You get a quest, you do the quest, and you check out the sites along the way. There is of course the new stuff, ship customization, settlement building, space battles, thousands of worlds to explore, new game plus. There's more, but you get the drift. The game feels a lot like Bethesda's other games, especially Fallout 4 and Skyrim, and doesn't shy away from the accompanying jankiness we know and love/hate. At least most of the bugs aren't detrimental to progression, unlike some games. In fact, the game is so similar to Fallout 4 that some of that game's music is in the game. Some areas feel like I'm about to meet up with Nick Valentine too. Before we get to picking the game's core design apart, I should mention that I like this game. It's not Game of the Year material, but it did steal 100 hours of my time while competing with Baldur's Gate 3, so I'd say it has some pretty decent staying power. It could do with better performance, but that goes for basically every AAA game these days. The general consensus on the game is a little more divided, however. Not that I put much stock in general consensus usually, but it's something you have to consider, analyze, and validate when learning from a creative product. In Starfield's case, there's a lot to be said about where the game is lacking. There's something missing from the game compared to Bethesda's previous open world escapades, and even though Vault Tech and space more than offsets those issues for me personally, they're still worth exploring and addressing. This isn't just about the ways the game fails to accomplish what it sets out to be, but where the game wastes its potential. Every game has untapped potential, but looking at what makes the game less appealing and the directions it could have taken instead is important. Without taking that step, you risk wasting these unexplored opportunities or running into the same exact issues that dragged the original experience down. There are three fundamental pillars of Starfield's design which have flaws that need addressing, and put together these flaws leave cracks in an otherwise tried and tested game experience. The game does fall short in other, more specific and tangible areas, but these fundamentals are the heart of the game, and the flaws in their design and execution are what risks breaking the game's core appeal completely. To start understanding where these issues lie, we first need to look at what sets the game apart from its predecessors, and that is the one big difference that gives Starfield's world an extra dimension. How do you make sure the player finds the interesting parts of a game's world? Bethesda has a good track record when it comes to directing players, especially in their more recent games. Skyrim is a great example of a way a player can be encouraged to go in all the right directions through the use of quests and landmarks. To show you what I mean, here's what the game offers you when you first enter the open world. Join the Imperial Legion, maybe if my career as a Dragon Slayer doesn't pan out. Well, I'm definitely heading over there. Nice cabin. And a nice old lady to go with it. I wonder what's inside. I hope she doesn't mind if I check out her basement. A coven? That doesn't sound good. Maybe I should leave. Whether you're driven by quests, landmarks, or your own personal motivation, every path you take will lead you to content. The quests you are given are an active incentive to explore the world, giving meaning to an action that can, at first, feel meaningless, even if it isn't. The path you follow for each of these quests is intricately designed so that by simply following the path to the objective given, you'll discover something new. Something that could pique your curiosity, or give you a reward just for exploring it. Sometimes you'll see a landmark in the distance and that becomes your objective, because they're designed to catch your attention and pull you towards areas you might never have visited otherwise. The longer you play, the more familiar you get with the main roads, of course, which is why the game lets you fast travel between discovered locations. That way you're venturing into new areas more often than not. Many other open world games also use this structure, such as Horizon and Cyberpunk 2077, because it's a tried and tested way to get the player to explore. Even games designed to give players complete freedom like The Outer Wilds and The Forgotten City start the player off with a prompt and some pointers on where to go, just to get the player thinking about what direction to take. Now imagine you took a game like Skyrim, deleted the entire world outside of cities and dungeons, then made it so you can fast travel to a location as soon as you get the related quest. This is Starfield. Here's how quests work in Starfield. This guy had a note on him. It says something about a secret outpost. I better check it out. Here's the marker on a planet. Let me just... Alright, let's head inside. Gunfight, puzzle, danger, note about son of the owner of this place running away like a coward, loot, and we're done. We even got a free ship for our efforts. This is a nice little self-contained quest, right? But this is a Bethesda game, known for their diverse open worlds. We don't want self-contained, at least not for everything. Unfortunately for us, this is how every quest that isn't confined to one of the settlements works, and there aren't many sizable settlements with more than a quest or two tied to them. There's nothing in between to explore, and very little that you'll discover naturally. The best you'll get is a random event that triggers when you enter orbit, but there aren't many and they're few and far between. With the travel to and from a quest objective just being fast travel with extra steps, that aspect of exploration is completely lost. In the drive towards making bigger and bigger open worlds, they've undermined one of the fundamental appeals of an open world, being able to find something of worth without being directly pointed towards it. There is another side to this story though. Unlike most other Bethesda games, quest-driven exploration of pre-made locations isn't the only option. Every planet offers a procedurally generated surface you can explore, in a similar vein to games like No Man's Sky. There are resources you can collect, the odd derelict structure to search, and unfamiliar wildlife to document. This plays well into the base building side of the game, which allows players to construct settlements they can cultivate and populate. Problem is, the system is completely disconnected from the traditional quest-given side of the game. That's a benefit to those who just want to adventure through the stars or build a nice homestead, but the lack of synergy between the procedural generation elements and the rest of the game is jarring. Places with actual quests and characters to find are restricted to set locations on planets, which are either already marked when you get in orbit, or are marked when you get the associated quest. There are very few quests that encourage you to go into the wilderness too. At best you're going to be asked to get some resources, but why would you put in the effort to find a planet that has enough of that resource, land there and harvest it by hand when you can just wait outside of a shop and buy up all their stock? In my time playing, the only mention of base building that I ran into was when Vasco, the robot companion who sits in the corner of the lodge after you finish the intro, mentioned I should build one unprompted. You don't need to talk to him ever, by the way, and you might end up forgetting he's there before he can give you that objective. There's also one moment in the main story where you're told you can build a key contraption at your settlement before you press the button right beside you that puts it in your ship instead 5 seconds later. There may be a side quest or two you can stumble across if you go mission hunting that points you towards base building, but that's far from enough to tie the two sides of the game together. This is a far cry from Bethesda's last major single player foray and the introduction of their base building mechanics, Fallout 4. The start of that game directs you towards the town of Concord, since it's the main path forward. Most first time players are going to follow it, and you soon come across a group of survivors asking for your aid. After helping them fight off some raiders, they ask for your help building a settlement, and now you know that mechanic exists. That's only the first time you're introduced to the idea of base building. It's indicated towards the other points, but if you're not interested in that side of the game, you can almost completely disregard it. Skyrim also does this for one of its hallmarks, the Civil War questline, because it's mentioned within a minute of leaving Helgen. The fact nothing like this exists in Starfield is baffling, because development time has been put into a system that isn't even signposted. It also doesn't help that after a few excursions you'll realize that the number of man-made structures that can be generated are painfully limited. The interiors aren't even randomized, so you can find the same exact notes inside each type of structure. It's ridiculous. And that's without pointing out how much nothing there is on these worlds in between. Sure, they're supposed to be open for the base building and to support the idea that they haven't been colonized, but before they added the buggy in an update, you'd spend 5 to 10 minutes sprinting between markers on the compass. And all you do during that time is scan animals and plants that you very quickly stop registering the differences of. This would be the part where I'd pitch a solution, but this feels like a nightmare problem. You're trying to make a massive 1,000-world galaxy using procedural generation while also offering handcrafted quests and locations to explore. The scope required to execute both of these aspects to a reasonable degree just isn't feasible. There are a few changes you can make to improve the situation at least, like changing the quests that exist to tell you about base building so they're harder to miss. Every player goes through New Atlantis at the start of the game, so you could throw in a town crier advertising a settlement building and planet scanning initiative there. That way players don't need to stumble across the mechanics themselves or find the one character who will tell them about it hidden off in a random bar. Alternatively, you could redesign the base building aspect to become more mobile. Taking a cue from Fallout 76, you could have your base directly linked to your ship so that when you land it's constructed in the landing zone automatically. That way you don't have to invest too much in a specific planet and have better access to your facilities or homestead. This could lean into an overhaul of the space travel system, where if you ran out of fuel or had a damaged part, you could land on a planet and use your mobile base to get your ship ready to continue traveling. Following this train of thought does start to shift the game into something it wasn't intended to be though. Having a mobile base isn't that similar to making outposts on different planets and staffing them with NPCs after all. You could have both, but that would make outposts even less useful than before. The fundamental issue of scale is where the problem becomes so much harder to tackle. Games like the Outer Worlds avoid this by having only a set segment of each planet explorable, and that Outer Wilds only has smaller, hand-tailored locations in a single solar system to worry about. If the game were scaled down to a few solar systems, where the player could land at set landing zones or hubs and then have to travel to dungeons on foot or via buggy, these issues would disappear. At that point you've made a sci-fi version of Daggerfall. That kind of misses the point though, right? You're supposed to be able to land anywhere on a planet and be able to explore freely, so limiting landing zones is a no-go. Cutting down the number of planets also limits how much you can participate in the actual spacefaring portion of the game too. But if you can't cut down on the scale or require players to explore the world space in those ways, I'm not sure what else you can do. You could try making it so more quests require you to explore the procedurally generated areas of a planet rather than direct you to a specific location. There's a few quests in the game that direct you from planet to planet in a daisy chain, when it could go, they went that away, and now you've got a reason to travel across the planet rather than go fly to the next objective. Then you can have quests you discover in these random locations you run across, since players will actually have a decent chance of running across them during normal gameplay. The bottleneck is the procedural generation, of course, as without more variety, searching the same locations over and over is going to get boring pretty fast. You also lose out on some of the hand-tailored aspects of the quests that are part of the appeal found in Bethesda titles, which takes away from the point of the handcrafted quest-driven side of the game. All the easy solutions require one side of the game to take a compromise in order to synergize with the other, and if neither compromises, you've just got two games sharing one world space, with little interaction between them. There's a reason Mass Effect and No Man's Sky are different games after all. This feels like a cursed design problem and I have no idea how you'd fix this. I'm putting a note in the script here in case I come up with something. Wait, I don't envy the designers at all with this one. This is a fundamental design issue that only exists because the game is trying to mix two different approaches to open world exploration together on such a massive scale. Please let me know how you'd approach this issue because I'm stumped. If a game having a world to explore or a compelling gameplay loop doesn't encourage you to keep playing, a compelling story will. So what is Starfield's story? Spoilers for the main quest, by the way. Here's an abridged rundown. You are a generic miner person, sent to collect an artifact your employer was hired to retrieve. You touch the artifact and have an out-of-body experience so jarring it throws you into the character creator. I named my character Swoosh, because her hair goes swoosh. She'll be joining us for the rest of the video. A guy meets with you, relates to your out-of-body experience, and directs you to meet with Constellation, the client who had hired you to dig out the artifact. When you meet with them, you learn their objective, to explore the cosmos and answer the unanswered questions of the universe, especially those relating to the artifact. What are the artifacts for? Who made them? Why do they make you see disco lights? Talking of disco lights, thanks to your out-of-body experience, you're going to be taking point for this adventure. So you head out and start collecting artifacts, and it looks like they're pieces of something, but you're not sure what. What are these artifacts supposed to build? What does it even do? The artifacts soon lead you to these temples that make you do an annoying puzzle and give you special powers. Looks like you're the Space Dragonborn now. But why are the temples tied to the artifacts? Why do they give you special powers? You're soon met by a mysterious spacefaring group called the Starborn, who have a vested interest in acquiring the artifacts before you and are willing to use lethal force when necessary. Who are these Starborn? How are they linked to the artifacts? Why are they only revealing themselves now? After a Starborn attacks the lodge, you're left with a fallen member of Constellation, but during the attack you overhear the attacker mention going after the Unity. What is this Unity? Why are the Starborn after it? How is it tied to the artifacts? And why did Adam Jensen have to die? He never asked for this. As you follow the footsteps of an ancient explorer, all these questions wander your mind. This entire story has been a mystery, building towards the reveal of a side to the Starfield you have yet to even glance at. Could the Starborn be the creators of the artifacts, wanting to take them back out of protectiveness or greed? They could be another group, maybe even aliens, who found us before we uncovered the artifacts and now they plan to invade the settled systems. Maybe they're time travelers waiting to prevent a dark future where the artifacts were used for nefarious means. The possible answers vary wildly, but it won't be long until your suspicions are confirmed or debunked. At the end of this pilgrimage, you're confronted by a Starborn ship. You may have noticed them following you from far away as you've been collecting artifacts or completing side quests. You've likely shot down a few of the ships as well, or killed a Starborn personally when they attempted to steal the artifact from you or ambushed you outside a temple. This time though, they're inviting you aboard. It's time for answers.
Hello. Again. Do you remember the emissary, perhaps? And their ship, the Helix? I believe they ambushed you above Neon and demanded that artifact you worked so hard to gain.
Your success is unprecedented. Before you came, we were just discussing how continued use of force against you is unwise. We are not a monolithic people. The Starborn are individuals. Some are united in cause. Others are in it for themselves.
We are all in it for ourselves. Some of us are just more honest.
The unity. You are on the path to it. It is a place, a gateway. It is where we were reborn.
So, I gotta say, this part is more awkward than I thought. Hiding my face was way easier.
So the Starborn, their constellation, and this random dude from different universes, the artifacts are used to reach the Unity, which is a gateway that turns you into a Starborn and sends you into a different universe. In short, the artifacts send you into New Game Plus. That answers some of our questions, but still leaves some important ones out in the open, namely who create the artifacts and where are they now? Unfortunately, from this point on, these questions take a permanent backseat. They are acknowledged later on, as just before entering the Unity you can explicitly ask about them.
Unknowingly, you just answered your own questions. For who creates things but creators? That is what they have been named throughout the endless circle of time. Are they one or many? Human or alien? Terrestrial or celestial? One day, you might even meet the creators. But not this day. As for the why, so that you could ask that very question, so that you could stand before me for time immemorial and delve into the mysteries of the unending cosmos.
So the answer is, there is no answer. Got it. Before you get your hopes up, there's barely any new story content in New Game Plus, so don't expect any answers on the other side. I don't mind you wanting to keep these creators as a mystery past the game's main story, but one of the fundamental questions you asked at the start of the main quest, which is themed around venturing into the unknown and discovering lost secrets, is centered on who these creators are. There's a whole debate section after you meet the Starborn where some of the Constellation members start to speculate on their origins and their ties to the artifacts. Yet here we are with nothing to go off of, not just from the main story but from the entire game. At least give us something to work with here. Looking at the questions that do get answers, even those lack detail. Going through the Unity makes you Starborn, but what is the actual difference? They have different biology, but that's all you actually get told. I'll just assume having hindsight makes you a different species. If the answers that were given were at least more specific, rather than the Starborn are humans but not really, there'd actually be some substance to dig into. Right now, half the questions you are prompted to consider don't get an answer, and the answers you do get are underwhelming. It sucks because some of the concepts that are woven into the answers that you are given are interesting, just barely explored. I can see a different version of the game that leaned way more into the Starborn angle. Having each one of them be a different version of a Constellation member, or even just characters you've run across in your travels. Even though we don't have all the answers, we do have our objective, the Unity. The problem is, why would anyone want to reach the Unity in the first place? For the Starborn, it's a power play. There's only so many temples in each universe, so going into different universes is the only way to enhance the powers they give you. The story makes it explicitly clear that not all Starborn share the same philosophy, however, as it sets you up with the conflict of deciding which of these two Starborn to side with, or to take on both of them yourself. The problem here comes with the player's motivation to go after the artifacts. There are a few different reasons you or your character might want to reach the Unity after this point. You might want power like the Starborn. You might want to explore what different universes have to offer in regards to new experiences. You might want to find answers, or make a different choice, or maybe you just want to screw over the Starborn. But what happens if you don't care about any of that? What other reason is there to keep going? Well, nothing. Starborn don't pose a risk to anyone except you, and that's because you're holding on to the artifacts. If they do get to the Unity before you, all that means is they jump into another universe, or stand watch to prevent you from going through it yourself. Hell, if you use the Unity yourself, the impact on the rest of the universe would be the same as if you had gotten lost in deep space. The objective here is just too disconnected from the rest of the world. Unless you're interested in going into New Game Plus, there is no reason to keep going after this point. And to rub salt in the wound, your character can't even express this lack of motivation, so you can't even play out someone who isn't interested in the end goal without just stepping away from the main quest. A world, I should highlight, that is intentionally designed to provide hundreds of hours of content without even going into New Game Plus. So this story, driven by a compelling mystery about these alien artifacts strewn across the galaxy, and then being hunted by a mysterious group, culminates in you finding out that you've been hunting down the opportunity to reset your progress. And you don't even get the answers to some of the first questions you ask. Other Bethesda games give you a fairly consistent motivation for their entire campaign, or at least give you a closure before switching the motivation. Oblivion has you following through the wishes of a late emperor in order to avoid an apocalyptic invasion. Fallout 3 has you hunting after your father, and the change in direction after discovering his fate ties directly into the mystery of why he ran off at the start of the game. Skyrim throws the threat of dragons in your face early on, and the entire campaign revolves around you trying to stop them destroying Tamriel. Fallout 4, similar to 3, has you hunting after your son, and the change in direction after discovering his fate ties into the mystery of why he was taken from you at the start of the game. Starfield is an outlier by switching the motivation for the player halfway through the story without giving a proper payoff for the initial questions asked. And even if there were a proper payoff, the connection between the pre and post reveal is pretty limited. It boils down to, we were curious what this thing did, now we know what it does, and whether or not a player invested in the space exploration story you had up until this point actually wants to go after the magic reset button is a shot in the dark. If that shot doesn't land, not continuing the main quest won't be enough to offset the fact you got this far through the story only to get to an outcome that doesn't even appeal to you. This last point is more of a nitpick, but it does have an impact on the experience, and your character in particular. We need to jump back a moment and look at how the story sets up your character and their place in the world. For all intents and purposes, you're running the same gauntlet as the Dragonborn. You're a nobody, but by circumstances you can't predict, you are thrust into the middle of a conflict and come into possession of powers few others have had the chance to ever wield. Using these powers, you're tasked with fighting against an opposing force that stands between you and your goal. While not as explicit this time around, you're led to believe you're an outlier. It feels like there's something special about your character, but you're not certain what. Personally, this was the point where I started to get a feel for the type of character I was playing, and I was all for leaning into the superhero helping everyone angle. That was until meeting with the Starborn. It's quickly established that the powers and such are par for the course when you're on the path to becoming Starborn. That doesn't make you not special though, in fact you are still an outlier.
To see what would happen, of course. You might not understand just how many times I've done this. Usually, you're the one who ends up dead, and whoever cries over your body goes on to become the emissary. Sometimes I manage to get you all bunched up and take care of the problem in one go. Sometimes the emissary has gotten to me first, and I never arrive. Hundreds and hundreds of variations of me, packing through Constellation. And it's almost never you. You making it to your ship on your own. It's new. I took it as a sign. I don't get many of those anymore.
So, it turns out what makes you noteworthy is that every other version of you that your opponents have run into, across thousands of universes, died far before this point. I don't know about you, but that just sounds like I've been reloading saves a lot. But on a more serious note, being told your character is only special because you usually suck so bad you're supposed to die way before this point does kinda kill the Chosen One / Space Dragonborn vibe. So you could take this in the way of, in a multiverse where there are many of me, I'm one of the few that got this far, or as a challenge to prove yourself worthy of reaching the Unity. But either way, being told, you're here? That's new, you usually suck, doesn't come off as very empowering. It doesn't help that you get told this in the same conversation you start to get answers and learn what the purpose of the Unity is, especially if you find the results on either of those fronts underwhelming. This isn't just flavor text, by the way, they throw this at you a few times during the main quest. There's even an interactive diorama before the final fight where they show you dying in another universe. Is this really important enough to mention? Not by itself, but I wouldn't bring it up if I wasn't going somewhere with it. With a few small changes, this could be a pretty powerful element to the story, and could be used as a jumping off point to improve the narrative element of New Game Plus as well. But before we get into that, we should look at where the story succeeds. The setup for the mystery works very well, and it did get me invested as it built up to a resolution. The twist of gaining space powers was a fun addition, and the ultimatum between the two Starborn you can side with is a good framework for the latter half of the campaign, especially since if you decide to work with neither of them, they team up against you. There's a lot of minor stuff in between I skip because I have no issue with it, like the heist on Neon and the search into why Earth lost its atmosphere. The mission in Tangled deserves a mention for being the sort of quest this game needed more of, although its limited presence did avoid the novelty wearing off. So how could we improve the narrative without having to throw out the good parts? First, we need more answers. Let's look back at the Elder Scrolls for a moment. The Elder Scrolls has had its fair share of missing civilizations, the most noteworthy being the Dwemer, who are dwarves but also technically elves, but that's not important. In Skyrim, the Dwemer have a presence in the background of the world, and the one mystery surrounding them involves their sudden disappearance. While this mystery is helped by not being one of the first questions posed to you during the main quest, you still get a drip feed of information that starts to paint a muddy picture around what may have happened to them. Starfield could have tackled its missing civilization by giving it more of a presence in the world, but not enough that the air of mystery is lost. With just a few noteworthy environments littered across the world, you can start to build a vague picture of what they were like without giving any specifics. Even without legible notes, environmental storytelling gives hints towards the history of the world around you. The state a location is left in can give you tons of hints to go off of, as long as they aren't just artifacts stuck in a random rock, or temple that is in ruins and completely barren of anything you can't directly interact with. Constellation, as a group of space explorers, does very little exploration and discovery during their journey. Most artifacts are acquired inside a bandit base or a mine, so if we want to lean into that discovery aspect, we need to give them somewhere new to explore. You could make it so the artifacts need to be taken to a specific place to be put together, and that place just so happens to be significant in the civilization's society. Or maybe one of the artifacts is in a workshop where they were made or studied. It's not significant enough to give away the whole story behind them, but it gives the player hints they can speculate on, even if it's something as simple as, all the cutlery is set out so they must have left in a hurry. Secondly, we should give the Unity a bit more of a use than just a way to head into New Game Plus. Something that gives it more presence in the world, and motivates players not interested in resetting their progress to pursue it anyway. If getting all the artifacts also came with a separate narrative purpose, like it could be used to end world hunger or something heroic like that, then this wouldn't really be an issue. If you pepper the campaign with more ultimatums where you lose something either way, like with the death of a Constellation member, you can make it so reaching the Unity gives the player the choice to save whatever they chose to sacrifice, bringing it back into existence without having to go through. You'd still need enough choices that it doesn't remove the want to go through the Unity to undo past mistakes though. Hell, mix the two ideas together and give the artifacts multiple uses for you to choose from. Maybe you can use the artifacts to help the USC make a super weapon, or you might use them to enhance the powers you've gotten from temples. You could even put them on display in a museum or sell them to a private collector. On the other side, the Starborn could intend to use the Unity in a way that threatens the settled systems directly. Maybe there's a way to use the Unity to gain even more power than the temples provide, but it risks destroying the universe you're in if done. Or maybe through accessing the Unity they can call in an invasion force of like-minded Starborn to take over your universe. You could go one step further and tie triggering a positive effect or mitigating a negative effect to going through the Unity, so going into New Game Plus could be recontextualized as a noble sacrifice done by either you or one of your companions. Problem there is you might put pressure onto the player to go through the Unity, but Fallout 3 had a similar situation, so Bethesda does have some experience with how to implement this dilemma. Just don't call me a coward for sending the super mutant into the irradiated room this time, okay? Thirdly, let's alter your character's place in all this. How about we lean into the nature of Bethesda games? You make your character, right? Every player does, and they're all different. Instead of there being infinite yous who had all died in every other universe, now it's a role where every other person, each with their own appearance, personality and backstory, has fallen before this point. Except you. It's a small change, and it might require a very slight change to a cutscene that takes place very late in the game, but it explains why there aren't other versions of you running around without devaluing the character you're playing as. It's not the only approach though. You could flip the script, have it so the Starborn have seen what you're capable of if they don't try and take you out of the picture early, and the fact you've still gotten this far with the precautions they put in place concerns them. Hell, maybe make the Hunter a different version of your character and they have some sort of vendetta against you or something. That'd be more impactful than him being some random guy you met a mission prior. If you want to keep the concept but also accommodate players who push back against it, you could throw in a few dialogue options when the idea is initially brought up. Something along the lines of, if you haven't dealt with me getting this far before, that just makes me unpredictable, or a simple I doubt that. Not something that actually changes the facts, but gives your character the opportunity to weigh in on this revelation. This is a minor issue, so a change really isn't necessary of course, but it can work as a jumping off point to further improve the narrative past the more blatant issues. These are just some examples to highlight how you could go anywhere with this, and if you handle it right you can make it feel more motivating and satisfying. If I were doing a full redesign of the game, I would pitch my preferred way of tackling these issues in a more specific manner. But I'd rather prefer you to think about the direction you would prefer to take the game yourself rather than pitch my own personal idea for what Starfield should be. But on the other side of these issues is New Game Plus itself, a mechanic that is meant to be a fundamental element of the game's design. Alongside the focus on the storytelling and exploring the cosmos, it was one of the key elements mentioned before the game's release. If that side of the game is fulfilling, it could make up for the lackluster storytelling, right? Well, about that. Alright, so you decided to go through the Unity and become Starborn. What happens now? Other than, you know, getting to play the game again? You've now entered a new universe. Most of the time it's the exact same as your first one, but sometimes it has a weird quirk centered around Constellation. You'll find out what it is within the first 10 minutes. You keep your levels, skills, powers, and everything else you choose in character creation. You also get given a unique ship and a neat set of Starborn gear. Now when you go through some missions, you might get an extra dialogue option based on the fact that you've already done it before. It's just enough to add some variety if you want to play the game again, and having New Game Plus as an option after you finish everything available in your first universe is pretty neat if you're attached to the character you've been playing as. Problem is, it kinda doesn't make sense. Firstly, you lose all your items. No big deal, right? Everything scales to your level, so you should be able to get similar equipment fairly easily. Yeah, but what about all those settlements you made? All those spaceships you designed? You also have 0 credits now, so you can't spend a ton on supplies if you want to go on a long exploration mission in the wilds. Then there's the extra dialogue choices. There are a few rare cases of different choices leading to different outcomes, but the vast majority of quests follow the structure of here's your objective, do it, here's the outcome. The most noteworthy outliers are the main quest and the Crimson Dawn / USC. The UC. Why is it wrong in every... Have I been saying it wrong the entire time? The most noteworthy outliers are the main quests and the Crimson Dawn / UC quests. You could also count the romances for different companions, I guess. The main quest has a few moments where you can make a choice that affects the outcome, like the moment where a different companion dies depending on whether you evacuate the lodge or protect Constellation's space station. The Crimson Dawn /UC... Why does it say UAC? The Crimson Dawn /UC story has you playing an undercover agent for most of the quest, but the final mission lets you choose which side to fight for, and the final mission changes drastically based on that choice. Kinda like the end of Dishonored, but instead of it considering your playstyle, you just have to talk to a different guy. The options added by playing in New Game Plus, labelled as Starborn, either allow you to skip exposition, bypass persuasion checks, or make a Deadpool-style wink at the audience. It serves to speed up a second playthrough and show that your character has the same knowledge you as a player do. In effect, you and your character are given the ability to speedrun the campaign. You can also avoid losing one of your companions, but functionally that just skips 2 entire quests. Before they changed it in an update after release, you didn't even get the choice to go back into character creation, so starting again through New Game Plus would prevent you from trying out different backgrounds. But since you can do that now, you can try out how different backgrounds affect gameplay when you're going for round 2. These are all the changes you get in New Game Plus. So by going into New Game Plus, you lose most of your progress, you get very few new options to explore, and the majority of your new choices just skip quests or dialogue. That's without even considering how it'll take hundreds of hours for you to hit the point of needing to reset reality by running out of quests or content to begin with. It feels like such an unnecessary inclusion, especially with how much focus the main quest gives it. But as always, a few changes can make all the difference here. Being able to save schematics for your settlements and ships at the very least would help compensate for the loss of these settlements and ships themselves, even though you'll need to build them back up from the beginning again. Sure, it's an annoying system to code, but losing all your resources is already a big ask for an invested player, and having to work out the layout of your bases and ships again might be too much. What is needed the most, though, is more variety in the game experience, such as having more branching paths and quests. You can't just add extra content on without impacting other parts of development, of course, but by cutting down the scope of the game and instead using the development time to add more ways quests can play out gives players more control over their impact on the world, and gives them more ways to explore what the game has to offer during subsequent playthroughs. While not every open world game goes out of their way to include player choice in their side stories, it's far from rare either, and this isn't unfamiliar territory either. Bethesda has done side quests that aren't faction focused with different outcomes before. I still remember how when I was playing Fallout 4, the quest The Secret of Cabot House ended with Lorenzo dying to raiders off screen. Alternatively, you could instead expand on the variation of different universes. As most exciting variations only affect the start of the main quest, they feel more like Easter eggs rather than actual game modifiers. And while I understand why the choice was made, making it so any universe option that isn't the default is a rare occurrence feels like a missed opportunity. I'm pretty sure the first time you go into New Game Plus you're guaranteed a default universe too, which doesn't help. Jumping off from the idea of every universe is based on a different playthrough pitched in the last section, why not use that as a framework for New Game Plus? Different universes are different because of how the different versions of the player character played through the game. Maybe they disappeared before reaching the lodge as seen in the default New Game Plus, although the default should be the one where you run into yourself and can have them as a companion, but I digress.
So I got one of the good universes, huh? Glad to hear it.
Maybe they died trying to get an artifact from a specific location and you can run through the aftermath. Maybe they've been going gung-ho in Aquila City and your first job is getting rid of your evil copy. You don't have to change too much for the main quest either because all those player characters are following the same limits you yourself found in the world. At most you need some dialogue where one of the companions goes, "Oh, you're alive? We haven't heard from you since you went to get that artifact on such and such. Do you still have it?" And then you go get it. It'd be a bit like invading someone else's game, like in Dark Souls or Watch Dogs, just without the multiplayer aspect. Whether you'd rather have it be your character invading another player's world, or going into the worlds of their failed counterparts and fixing their timeline, it's a damn sight better than occasionally the Constellation members are replaced by children, because it actually has an implied story you can follow instead of just being a funny Easter egg. Another approach to variety in the game's content would be using New Game Plus as a part 2 to the main campaign. Going through the Unity is framed as a path towards learning more about the multiverse, so why not make that the focus the next time around? You meet with Constellation, you tell them everything you know about the artifacts, and try to discover what happened to the civilization that made them while the Starborn tried to steal the artifacts from you. You could go the route of gameplay modifiers too, like every planet having frequent terramorph attacks, or there being more space battles because the Crimson Fleet ran a successful recruitment campaign. While I wouldn't recommend actually including this, the idea of jumping into a new universe and arriving in New Atlantis only to find that everyone in this universe speaks a different language that neither you nor your character understands would be funny. Congratulations, you've defeated the Starborn and passed through the Unity. Welcome to the universe where everyone is French. All of these changes give more focus to the narrative elements because players who are more invested in the story side of the game, following quests and such, are going to run out of content much faster than those invested in the exploration element. And the way procedural generation works means any limitation in replayability affects your first playthrough just as much as it would in any subsequent playthroughs. Not that I would be against having unique points of interest that only generate in certain types of universes, but we could do with a bigger variety of locations in general first. But more importantly, these changes give the option of New Game Plus more of an impact and works to justify why it has so much focus in the main story. With the promise of more content to discover and more mysteries to solve, this becomes an interesting twist of the game's experience for those who get that far into the game. Of course, the only reason this system is so problematic is because of how much value it's given. If it weren't for the main objective you work towards, none of these changes would be anything more than a "wouldn't it be cool if we did that?" But with it being the driving force for the main story, it needs some payoff. These changes do run into the issue of scale, but that's an issue that seems to be the root of a lot of issues that plague Starfield. It just doesn't make sense to put so much effort into making a giant expansive galaxy and to put so much focus on resetting your progress in it when there's very little reward for doing so. Either way, the problem lies not with the system itself, but with the way the game treats it. It either needs to have its focus justified or to have the focus redirected to something you'd actually want to go for. There's so much potential here just waiting to be taken advantage of, but Starfield has long since been released, so there isn't much that can be done. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. They did attempt to rectify some of these issues in Starfield's first and only, at time of writing, DLC Shattered Space. Almost all of the new content is set on Varun Kai, a new planet, with a short introduction via a space station that hunts you down whether you'd like it or not. Effort has been put into making the city on this planet, Dazra, and the surrounding area fit more into the design concepts of other Bethesda games, and as such the issues with exploration aren't there. Quests here have tons of secrets and branching paths you can take advantage of, actually giving you an incentive to replay the content on this planet in future runs. The story sets up some mysteries and actually has them pay off too. This shows that the developers making post-release content for the game understand where the game is lacking, or at least that the strength of Bethesda's games design come from how the open world worked in previous titles. You know what Shattered Space doesn't have though? Space exploration. Once you leave the introductory space station, there are no quests that require you to leave this new planet. I found one that revolved around a guy fleeing the city and wanting to escape the planet, but it started and ended in the same world space. You don't even get the option to ferry the guy off the planet. It's also pretty clear in the world map where the barrier between "a dev made this" and "computer make random stuff" lands. The DLC doesn't try very hard to fit into the rest of the world outside of itself either, barring the infrequent narrative ties to the rest of the settled systems. The base game still has the issues it always has, but Shattered Space gives us a glimpse of the potential the game has at a different scale. Bethesda is presumably working on The Elder Scrolls 6 at the moment, so most of these issues won't be relevant anyway. That doesn't mean there isn't any worth in pointing out the flaws, of course, but I'm not too concerned that Starfield is a canary in the coal mine for Bethesda's design philosophy, especially with Shattered Space showing that the developers working on this project understand where the game is strongest. Here's hoping there's more content like that coming to Starfield in the near future. Starfield does have a lot of potential just waiting to be taken advantage of, so when Bethesda decides to make Starfield 2 in 20 years' time, we might have another chance to see that potential come reality. That's when these considerations could help make a product that makes these conflicting aspects work in synergy, rather than splitting development in what feels like two different games sharing a single world space. It's not like the execution didn't land whatsoever. It definitely did for a sizable chunk of their audience, but with some tweaking it could appeal to many others and take advantage of the potential the game has while doing so. In the meantime, other developers can learn from the missteps taken with Starfield and take advantage of the missed potential in their own projects. And while the core aspects of the game can only be altered so far, the modding functionality that the game offers does allow players to explore avenues of the game's design that Bethesda did not, and possibly turn Starfield into a more familiar and cohesive experience. Maybe with enough tinkering, you yourself can create your own version of Starfield that fits what you imagine the game should be, or, you know, you could just fill it with so many mods it turns into Star Wars. Ever since the release of Cyberpunk 2077, I've learned not to overhype new games. That has saved me on a fair few occasions where wanting more than the last game but with different levels would have left me disappointed. I'm excluding indie games though, those are usually as awesome as they sound. I do find that often when I play games like Starfield, or even those that have earned critical acclaim, I get inspiration for different directions the game could have taken. Not necessarily better directions, but unrealized potential that is worth exploring, even if just verbally. There's a lot of games I could talk about in that way, so if you have any suggestions for games that might be worth covering, feel free to leave them in the comments. I do read them all, outside of the rare occasion that YouTube decides to not notify me. Suggestions or not, having that sort of format would help me come up with video ideas faster, which is the main bottleneck right now. But that won't stop me talking about anything different if I feel the urge to. Make sure to stick around for more videos about games design if you're into that jazz. It's the best way I can put my degree to work right now, but I might post progress on making my own game in the future too. Really depends on how many projects I can juggle at once. Either way, I hope whatever I post here will catch your interest. See you around.